It's like the color forms. Remember the color forms where you can start putting up the scene and adding the pictures to it. So.
I don't know that game.
You don't know that game?
No.
I'll show you later.
Okay.
All right. So do you feel any anger or resentment towards your family at all? Did this process?
Now?
Yeah.
Yeah, I do.
Mm-hmm.
I've often felt in my life that I was born an alien in the wrong family, but really none of us fit together really well. My parents had made bad choices of mates.
Mm-hmm.
And just, the stars had configured to make my brother and I have different characters.
Mm-hmm.
And nobody really seemed to understand. It was a terrible life. It was a terrible childhood. But to me, it was just my childhood.
Mm-hmm.
I don't like those people much,
Mm-hmm.
But understand them, yes. I certainly understand them now that I've done this book. I feel I understand them more on the level of an adult, so I can understand their impulses better than I could when I was a kid. But this book is written from the point of view of a 6-year-old and a 14-year-old and a 15-year-old, and those you can't understand grown-ups in that way.
So you kind of answered how you feel about your parents now. Do you have the same relationship with your brother now?
My brother and I, this is a good story. I have to just give you a little background. My brother and I haven't really spoken together, had not really spoken together for good 40, 45 years without tension and a lot of acrimony. And about 2 years ago, before the book was even finished, I got a call from Bob Weil, my editor in New York, and he said, "David, have you seen the cover of the Times today?" And I said, "Bob, I live on the edge of a prairie. We don't get the Times out here." And he said, "Well, you can get it online now, so go on and dial it up, and I'm not even going to tell you what article it is, you'll know. And then call me back, because I have to ask you some painful questions." So I looked up the New York Times, and there was this article. It was the latest memoir publishing scandal. I can't remember the name of the book, but it was some woman who lives in Portland, Oregon, who had written a book about growing up in the drug cultures of LA and drive-by shootings and so on. And after the book was published, her sister had called up the Washington Post and exposed it as a total lie, not just a partial lie, just a lie from beginning to end. She had grown up in a very nice neighborhood of LA and gone to the best schools. And so, as I was calling my editor back, her publisher was shredding 75,000 copies of a book, and she was going online and, on television and crying and trying to make excuses. And so my editor, Bob, said, "David, I know this has nothing to do with your book. I know your book is straight truth beginning to end, of course, but I have to remind you, I work for a publisher and I have to protect their interests. And so I have to ask you, is there anyone at all, who might have been alive during that period who might remember things differently than the way you do?" And I said, "Well, I do have this brother." And he said, "Have you shown him the book?" And I said, "No, it's not finished." "Does he know about it?" "Of course." I didn't want to spring it on him. I told him I was writing it. "Well, why haven't you shown it to him?" And I said, "Bob, the last time I spoke with my brother, I told him to go himself, and that I never wanted to hear from him
Oh, you've got to
again."
say that. It'd be the first time in a David Small Eyes you dropped the F-bomb. Children?
And I said, "I don't ever want to hear from you again. I don't want to know about your troubles. I don't want to know about your illnesses. I'm not interested." And he agreed that that was a good idea. And Bob said, "Well, you have to show it to him, because I have to protect my company, and you need to know what's going to happen. We all need to know." So my brother's wife had died two months before, and I thought maybe this might offer him some diversion from whatever mess he was in, emotional mess at the time, and because he'd been married for 33 years and had been very close. And so I emailed him and asked him if I could send him the book, and he says, send it on. So we sent him a copy, a stack of Xeroxes, and I gave him 4 days to read it before I called Denver, and I said, well, what did you think? And there was this long, heart-stopping pause on the other end of the phone. And then my brother, who speaks in these very sepulchral Nixonian tones, said, David, sounded just like my dad, your book blew me away. He said, I can't believe you did this. It looks like everybody. They act exactly the way they did. They say the same things. It's like a snapshot of my youth. And then he asked me if he could show it to his therapist.
Who was a bear.
And I said, congratulations on being in therapy.
Yeah.
And he wanted to know if he could show it to his grown sons. And I knew then that, that I had done something good. And I knew then, too, that if nothing else happened with this book, that it would have been worth it to me to have done it. So, you know, I think, oh, and by the way, Coda, 2 months later, my brother came to to Mendon, and spent 4 days with us. Fell in love with my wife. We ate and drank and laughed and talked and reminisced. And, you know, I have my brother back again. And I think what we both realized, we've talked about it since, was that the reason we didn't want to have anything to do with one another was because we didn't want to have anything to do with anyone or anything that reminded us of our early lives. And his was just as bad as mine, maybe worse, because he was the oldest.
Yeah, I think you said once it was like the test case in some ways.
The oldest kid is the test case.
Exactly.
Yeah.